that was sued for mold problems about a year after a project was done. And they went back into their job logs and their daily photos, which saved them from having to pay out a lot of money to settle that lawsuit. And so I say that, we did a podcast on it, and then the lawyer said, no, you're not allowed to put that on the air, so we had to delete it, but it was really informative about how important documentation is nowadays. And I've been beating this drum for years, like you have to do job logs. And photos are a little easier, but actually taking time to write out a job log or type it or dictate it tends to be something that project managers and lead carpenters don't really like to do. And yet, they have to do it. It's just so important. The biggest problem is you can go for years and years and years and never need them. And everybody goes like, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. It's just a waste of time. And then all of a sudden there's that one job where there's a dispute, goes to the lawyers or arbitration, and then it really makes a lot of sense to happen. So I'd really encourage you, and I think the platform for those is a little easier. You can use Smartsheets or Google Sheets or some of the other programs that we already mentioned that do a good job of holding those job logs and pictures for future retrieval, if you will. So that's something I've been trying to share with everybody because people have a lot of trouble with it. Okay? Anything else? Yes, sir.
What do you think is really important to include in daily logs besides pictures and just work done?
Okay, so daily logs, there are formulas. The commercial world has basically things like date, weather, who's on the job site, work that was accomplished, and probably the most important one is conversations and decisions that are made. So for example, everybody in the room has had that experience where someone talked to the client about this. We agree we're going to do this, right? 2 months later, who told you to do that, right? And so that's where you have the conversation, you document it. Now, if you get the client to review them, and again, one of the nice things about some of these cloud-based programs is you can have a job log that is client centered, friendly, where they can read it, and therefore some of the responsibilities on them. Documentation of notes can also be a really important thing. I'm going to refer to my podcast a lot because there's so much cool stuff there that I learned. Okay, there's one in there about it from a project manager in Ann Arbor. They use an app called Otter, O-T-T-E-R. It's an artificial intelligence app in all their site meetings with their clients, and it automatically creates a transcript of everything that was said in that meeting. And all you have to do is go in there and say, speaker 1 is Bill, speaker 2 is Sue, speaker 3 is Bob, and it'll print out, and it does apparently an exceptionally good job. And so this is another thing that I just think is really cool, good use of technology to help in terms of documenting things. And then you can get the client to sign off on those client meetings very easily. It's not just somebody's interpretation of what was said by somebody else in that meeting. But those 5 things, the weather, the date, who was on the job, decisions that were made, and the work was accomplished, tends to be the things that need to be in the job log. Okay, anything else? Other questions? I'll make sure people get here. Let's get started, because then you'll have questions and we can follow up. All right, so we're going to do zero punch list. Here's my contact information. Feel free to write me. I already mentioned the podcast. I love doing the podcast. The joke about it is within the office, somebody in the office said, Tim, would you do a podcast? And I said, sure. And then there was like this pause of 20 seconds, and I said, what's a podcast? Right? And then I learned very quickly what it was, and I love doing it, and there's so much good information. The thing that I like about it more than anything is the guests always have ideas that I would never think of. And just like Otter and some other things that we have set focused on there, there's 217 episodes already done, so it'll take you a while to catch up, but you know, I really encourage you to do that. I also do a newsletter, which you're welcome to subscribe to. I'll give you all that at the end. Okay, so I think the first big issue with Zero Punch is identifying the challenges that you have as a company to actually making this happen. I was joking with one of the other participants in here, you know, like how do you make Zero Punch? You get paid and then you don't answer your phone, right? Like, that's not Zero Punch, right? That's standard contractor use, which we're not, right? Okay, here's the things that I want to really emphasize here. Number one, anytime you have a list, somebody's going to want to leave something for it. So if you even say, we're going to have a list, somebody's going to say, I'm going to wait till I put stuff on the list. So part of the key to this is deciding as a team that you're not going to have the typical punch list, okay? And I'm going to talk about another list, but you're not going to have that typical punch list. People leave things undone for a lot of different reasons. One of the bigger things that I think is a challenge for us is just not doing inspections of work very carefully. Now, if we had a little, 12 by 14 room, I would demonstrate by standing in the middle of the room, and I said, the paint just got done, right? You stand in the middle of the room, you go, wow, this looks good, right? Wow, how's the client going to inspect it? They're going to get right up to it, right? And they're going to feel the walls. They're going to look at the corners. So we don't inspect the way our clients do it. So one of the keys is going to be figure out how your clients inspect your work and then inspect the same way. One of the other things, I just ran into this last week working with a company up in Vermont. One of their challenges, they promised the Smiths that they would start a job on April 1st, and the job that Bill is on isn't done yet, right? They didn't quite get it done, and so Bill's what? Bill's got to pull off because a promise is a promise, and then who's supposed to manage it? Who makes sure that somebody goes back to that job? So in my world, I think the lead carpenter or project manager is the first line of responsibility. So they should be saying, I have to go back and finish that job. I may have to start this one, but I have to go back and finish. And then sort of above that is what I believe is the production manager kind of takes care of that. So business owner may be the production manager, it depends on the size of the company. But somebody has to make sure that that work is actually being done. So what about this need a draw so we rush into the final meeting? Now let me tell you something. If your punch lists are like 25 items that are obvious, that's not a punch list. Because I know that a lot of people do their contracts where at the signing of punch list, we will collect this draw and then there's a final payment. And so I have to, come on, let's get the list made because they owe us $30,000 and we need that to make payroll this week or whatever it is. And so you have to really watch out for that. And then the last one is what I call the warranty crunch or crutch. And so the idea, now listen to this from the client's perspective. You're talking to the client and you say, look, we're going to make a list of things that have to be finished up. Once they're finished up, you'll pay us the final check, and then anything else that shows up later on is going to be warranty. What did the client hear? There will be things that show up later on. So what does the client do? They keep making a list, right? They just get, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to call you 6 months from now. We're going to make sure it all gets done right now. And so I think it sounds good. It sounds like a really good way to do it. Now, I'm not saying at some point you don't shift over to warranty. You have to do that, obviously. But many times people are really trying to say, it's not quite done, but we're going to shift everything over to warranty. All right. So the second thing is, I think expectations have to be changed right from the very beginning of anything that goes on. So internally, everybody in the company has to start saying, we are going to hit zero punch. If anybody in the company says, hey, it doesn't really matter, or what are those nasty words that I don't like to hear? it is what it is, right? Right, so just if you got anybody that's thinking that way, whether it's from sales all the way on through. Now, I think I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, but one of the things here internally is that both the sales team, the production team, the design team, everybody has to be looking at this as our goal is to get to the end of this thing with no client-driven list. Okay? In other words, when we walk out of here, we're going to be walking out totally complete. And then, I think externally, when we think about it, we have to help the client start looking at it and say, there's not going to be a list. Now, what do they think from before they even hire you? There's going to be a list. That's their expectation because everything they've read and everything they've heard and every friend they talked to said, don't let that contractor leave without paying for, doing the list. And so you have to work throughout the entire project to get the client to admit that there's not going to be a list, okay? And so that's the challenge that you're up against in many ways. All right, so it starts with sales. So again, my experience with sales, the salesperson goes in to talk to the client has all these questions, and in order to reassure the client that we're going to finish the job and finish it strong, we say something like, at the end of the project, we'll be making a list. Everything on that list will be things that you see and we see, and then when that's finished, the job is done, and then we move into warranty. And so, again, I think that sets the client up for the expectation that they have to be watching out for us and catching us. Now, we would never admit it, but it's sort of like they have to catch us in order to get us to fix these problems that they see. And so I think what sales needs to be doing is right from day one telling the client, we don't do a punch list. We don't do a punch list the way that you've been told you have to do a punch list. And so part of it is having a really defined process. What do you do at the end of the job to make sure there isn't any list, or what, not necessarily the end of the job, scratch that. What do you do through the whole job to make sure that there's no list at the end? Talk about what production is going to do, and some of that stuff I'll cover in just a minute. In other words, this is how we handle this. This is how we walk through the project to make sure we don't have that. And then, right, supply chain problems, everybody has them. And so when I talk about no list at the end, I understand that there is a refrigerator on, order, and that's coming in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 2 months or maybe next year. And so, yeah, that's going to be on the list, okay? That's going to be there and work that out. But these are all the things, what we're talking about here are all the things that we can control. Now, here's the challenge for us about that. Sometimes we blame our lack of planning on a manufacturer, right? So we say, how long does it take to get these light fixtures? Oh, we can get them in a few days. Did anybody check on that? Did anybody call to find out how far they are out? And so our lack of planning doesn't mean we can then leave it for the list. And so part of it is we have to be more diligent now than ever before about planning ahead, which is another topic, but making sure that we get everything there that needs to be there. So it starts with the sales process. They have to help set that tone. Now, I don't know exactly the words that sales wants to use. Maybe the right wording isn't, we don't do a punch list, but maybe it's more about, we like to finish jobs very effectively and efficiently. We need your help all the way through to make that kind of thing happen. It's something that most remodelers don't do, and so you may never experience this before, but here's what we're going to do to make that happen. So we're setting expectations with the client. All right, so this next one is a very proactive approach towards, and I just defined it, bring the client into the process way up front. And so you'll see it right here. You see, now I don't know how many of you do a pre-construction meeting. What I My definition of that is a meeting with the client 3 or 4 or 5 days, maybe a week before it actually starts, and you're going through some things, logistical things that are gonna happen on the project. When's everybody gonna show up? Where's the water shut off? All these kind of things. Many of you are already doing it. But one of the things that isn't covered well enough, there are two things. One of them is like all the stuff that's not written down that we really need to talk about. But the other one is, how are we gonna do this zero punch? Now, again, where this, I think this really has its mettle is if the lead carpenter or the project manager, whichever you're using, actually does the talking. Mr. and Mrs. Fowler, we're excited to be here working, and here's how we're gonna handle the end of your job. Or here's how we're gonna handle getting to the end of your job without having anything left for us to finish up when we declare the end of the project, or something like that. They have their own words for that. And then right here, one of the seminars I was in the other day, you gotta tell people what you want them to do. The client has already read about how you have to be caught, and so they have to make a list. So you've gotta turn it around right here. Here's what I want you to do to help me make this happen, right? Now, some of that is all of it's followed up right here, but you have to ask, will you help me make this happen? And then wait for the client to answer the question. Now, one of the things I've realized recently through the podcast and some other things that I've been reading is that whenever you're talking with someone, particularly like a client, the second question is almost more important than the first question. And so the first question might be, so will you help me get to the end of this project without having anything left that either one of us can find to finish up? And they say, well, that sounds like a really good idea if it's possible. So what's the second question? Well, do you believe it's possible? And they'll go, no. Now you know where you stand, right? You know that client's gonna need a lot of convincing. But if they say, yeah, that would be spectacular, and so you will help me, right? And they get them to, exit row thing on an airplane. I don't know how many of you fly very much, but you have to say yes, that you'll help on an exit row. Verbally, you can't just nod, you can't say, you gotta say yes. Get your client to say yes, okay? They will help you do this. The second thing is, during a weekly site meeting, which is another thing that has taken off, it's really become a thing in our industry, and make sure you have a weekly meeting with the client. But in that meeting, and this comes out of one of the podcasts that we did on Zero Punch, the project managers found lots of different ways to say to the client, hey, we're working hard to get to this no punch list thing. Is there anything you're seeing that I might have missed? Is there anything you want to talk to me about that you think is a challenge? You got to find lots of different ways to ask it, but asking the client for their feedback all the way along. Now, again, you don't need to see a show of hands. It's happened to me. A client brings something up at the end of the project and they say this, I saw this about 3 weeks into the project, but I didn't want to say anything because you were so busy getting stuff done. It's like, I could have dealt with it 6 weeks ago, and now I've got all cleaned up, and now I've got to bring everything back in. So you want them to start telling you things that are on their mind as you go along. Now, the big key to this is that you are creating a completion list as you go along, right? You actually have a running list of everything that you know has to be completed on that project. And the client says, I saw there's a piece of trim missing behind this door. And you whip out your list and you say, that's number 7 on my list, but thank you so much for telling me. What are we doing? Building trust. Yeah, you saw it too, right? And so now if you don't have it on your list, you say, oh, thank you so much. You put it on your list, and if at all possible, before your next weekly meeting, you take care of that thing. Because what? You're listening. You're paying attention. You're not disregarding them. I'm the type of personality that if I don't think you're listening to me, I won't tell you. right? I think many of us are. If I don't think you care, I'm just gonna say, well, let's see what happens, right? And so the weekly meeting, really, really important. And then this walkthrough thing is, I think the idea here is that we're gonna engage the client in a list, right? But it's not driven by them. And so about 80% of the way through, the lead carpenter or project manager just takes whatever time they need to make an exhaustive list of everything. There might be 150, 200 things on that list. And, you know, hey, it's obvious, the toilets have to be set. Put it on the list, right? And you're creating yourself a completion list. And then what you do with that is you're gonna, one of these weekly meetings, you don't give the client the list, right? You hold on to the list, but you walk through the project with the client and say, I just want to go through, we're going to be finishing up here in about 4 weeks. I've got a list of everything that I believe needs to be finished for this project. I'd like to walk you through it. If there's anything else you see, or if there's anything you see that you'd like me to pay attention to, don't say fix or anything like that. If it's something you want me to pay attention to, then I'll put it on the list if I don't have it. And again, you want them to bring you stuff, and you want to have it on your list already. And so you're continuing to build that trust. So I think, again, one of our biggest problems with these lists at the end of the job is we've kind of put the client on hold. Said, don't bring anything up till the punch list. We don't want that. We want them to bring it up as soon as they see it, not at midnight, you know, with a phone call. But, you know, we want them to bring it up as soon as they see it. Number 5, get trade buy-in. That's all I have on that. Good luck. But seriously, I think one of the things that we do have to do is get our trades in on this thing, because they have a big part of the work that we do. And part of it, I believe, is getting them to understand the impact on customer satisfaction. So the idea that, you know, a trade will very often tell you, hey, look, if anything pops up, I'll come right back. Okay, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Hopefully they do. But that little bit of, hey, they had to come back, just starts to erode that client satisfaction or that client experience. And so you want to have really good conversations with your trades about the client experience and what that does for you. Talk to them about referral business and how much, you know, that means to you as a business, and get them involved in this process, okay? There's a lot of things that you can go into that. So here's the thing about the careful inspections. We have to inspect the jobs the way the clients do. You notice I put visual touch lights. Here's the big, our client went out and bought an 85,000 watt light bulb and they're inspecting the paint job. Why didn't you do that? You know they're gonna do it. Why don't we do it? Well, now, pardon me to NAHB, because NAHB book says if you can't see it from 6 feet away, it's okay. What do your clients think? No, if I can't see it from 6 inches away, you know, it's okay. And so you have to think like your clients. And so when I'm working with carpenters and project managers and stuff, I go like, take your tools off, sit down where the kitchen table is going to be. You know, sit in the bathtub, stand in front of the mirror and see what you see behind you. Sit on the toilet, right? There's all these things, these places that people sit and stand and, you know, stay stationary and they look around. Now there's a few things, like I had a job one time where you could only see this blemish as the sun was setting at 7 o'clock at night in certain direction from the sun, right? It's like we couldn't see that no matter what happened. Obviously we went back and took care of it once it was brought to our attention. But as much as you can, we have to touch things. Paint jobs, like trim on doors and windows, you gotta run your hands all around that thing and touch every aspect of that, because that's what the clients are going to do. Take time at the end of each phase to inspect what's going on. I think there's probably a good, there's a good reason, but there's a good reason to spend a whole day at some point. Nobody working on the job. I'm just gonna go through and do a very careful inspection. Like maybe after drywall is finished, right? Before trim goes in. Maybe when trim is finished, before paint is done. Maybe, maybe there's some times when you just have to take the time to make sure that everything gets really carefully inspected. I like checklists. Those of you who've heard me speak before, you probably heard me say checklists because I really like them. I think there's a lot of really good things that you can do. You can start with a checklist. I encourage you to sit down with your production team and say, hey, we're making a checklist today for paint inspection. And then let them blitz off all the things they've seen that went wrong with paint. And then you've got a checklist. Right? And then every time something comes up or a client catches something that's not on your list, it goes on the list. And so you can have a very small amount of checklists. If they cover what you're trying to do, you can have a lot of checklists if you need more than that. The other thing that I like about checklists is you can really start training your new people. If you bring new people into the company, what have you got? You've got a standard already written down. This is what has to be inspected for us to be able to move on to the next phase. And so you start bringing people in to the equation that makes you successful very, very quickly with checklists. I put Ed H checklist at the bottom there just to remind you. In one of my production manager roundtables, we've got a new home builder out of Madison, Wisconsin. And they are, it's him and a couple of people. Many times home builders, it's just a few people in the overhead, and then they have subcontractors that do everything. But they have builder subcontractors. And so when they get to the end of the job, Ed has a checklist. And again, we did a podcast on this, and I'd encourage you to listen to it. He has a checklist that is 76 items that he checks before he'll finalize the payment to the builder. And it equals 100 points. He does it on an Excel spreadsheet, and certain things get a little more points and some get half a point and things like that. But he goes through and he checks every little thing. Now, this may not surprise you or astound you, but here's what I saw. On that list is there grit in the faucet? Where you take that little screen off, is there grit in there? Wait a minute, dude, right? But that's the kind of thing that shows up on a punch list. It's not, are the windows square, right? The operator might show up on there, but it's those little things. A door stopper. How many of us have had door stoppers? How about this one? The receptacle covers are crooked. Whose fault is that? It's the painter, right? No, it's the electrician. And then, okay, let's inspect them all. And so I just encourage you to listen to that podcast. It's got some great information in there. But that's the extent that he wants to go through before that house goes to the buyer, for them to look through, do the walkthrough, and do whatever they have to do with it. Several sets of eyes, I think, is a no-brainer. Again, maybe when we get to that 70 or 80% complete, the job manager, project manager, lead carpenter makes a walkthrough. One of the big things in our production manager roundtables is peer walkthroughs. And so another lead carpenter goes to that job and goes over that list and walks through, because the one that's been running the job is now job blind. They don't see all the little things that they, especially if the job's been 6 months or a year in process. The production manager could be doing this as well. Often the sales designer could be doing it. I don't think you need all three. And when I do this presentation in an hour form, my last one is previous client, question mark, right? And everybody laughs and they go, oh, Mrs. Smith, she can do this. But seriously, who do you need to walk through to make sure that you catch everything that your client's going to see, so that you can deal with it before the client gets to the end of it, you get to the end of the project. And then the last thing here is change the name of this thing. right? And so a number of companies that they just call it a completion walkthrough. In other words, when they meet the client at the end of the job, it's not called a punch list walkthrough, it's called a completion walkthrough, right? Amstead in Ottawa, one of our podcast guys, they called it a celebration walkthrough. And they literally would bring champagne and cake and balloons, and there was nothing about that walkthrough like, let's find a problem. It was all about, man, this is amazing. But they followed this idea all the way through with the client. By the time they got there, it really was done. We call it the handoff, or whatever you call it, make it about the amazing project, not about finding deficiencies. Now, I don't know if you know much about Canada, but in Canada, it's called a deficiency list. And I thought, man, we ought to get rid of that term right away, because, but the idea is, let's work really hard at getting everything taken care of before we get to the end. Then we won't have this amazing list. Now, the companies that have done this tell me it takes about a year to get everybody thinking about it, to get everybody on board, to actually make this kind of thing happen. But I would encourage you to set some goals, like the next 5 jobs, the list is going to be 10 or less. Then the next 5 jobs after that, we're going to be down to 8 or less. You notice I didn't quite cut it in half, because once you get down there, it gets harder and harder, right? And so then really, really shoot for that final 0 punch. So here's my information. Feel free to give me a holler anytime. We've got 5 minutes. Any questions? Comments? Snide remarks? Thank you so much, folks. I think there's still a little